Hi, I'm Nick Haig, and welcome to the World's Greatest Business Thinkers podcast. Dr. Vikram Mansharamani is a global trend watcher who shows people how to anticipate the future, manage risk, and spot opportunities. He's the author of 3 books, Think for Yourself, Boom Bustology, and The Making of a Generalist, Finding Success in an Uncertain World. He's a frequent commentator on issues driving disruption in the global business environment and has been listed twice as a LinkedIn top voice for money, finance, and global economics. Vikram has spent almost 15 years on the faculty at both Harvard and Yale and has spent decades advising several Fortune 500 CEOs on how to navigate the radical uncertainty in today's business environment. I know you're going to love Vikram's insights today, but there are so many other great guests in the back catalogue, so make sure you dig into those and follow and subscribe wherever you listen and watch your podcasts, and you'll never miss another episode moving forward. Welcome to the World's Greatest Business Thinkers podcast, Vikram.
Hi, thanks for having me, Nick.
Well, I'd like to start today, like I start all my episodes, with my guests giving some background to how you became who you are today, having been called, one of the most powerful people in global finance.
Well, it's an interesting question, Nick, and thanks for starting with it. Let me begin by saying I've never really felt like I fit into whether it was an academic discipline or a function in an organization or even a traditional career trajectory. And so what I found was maybe it's an intellectual ADHD or some problem that I have, but I was interested in everything. And what I found was I was really interested in biology. I was interested in economics. I was interested in sociology. And so even going back to my undergraduate days, I had trouble focusing. And in some circles, that's a problem. I decided to embrace it and say, that's okay if I don't focus. Let me look at the connections across these domains. So to make a long story short, I quickly found myself as a generalist navigating a whole bunch of different uncertain domains. My career happened to start on Wall Street. I started working in the M&A group at Merrill Lynch. This was in the 90s. And even there, they were trying to slot you into an industry vertical and I couldn't do it. I didn't want to be stuck in one industry. So what I did was I managed to find my way to the M&A group. And the mergers and acquisitions group was dealing with all sorts of industries, all sorts of situations. And it was my version of being a generalist. I didn't know it at the time. I just knew I didn't like to be put in one box. Long story short, I went on, I pursued a PhD. I spent some time in different functions in finance. And to answer your question, how did I find myself in this world where I'm doing a lot of public commenting and thinking about navigating uncertainty, both financial and otherwise? It's really because of this generalist logic. And eventually I wrote a book about it. And the book was called Boom Bustology. And Boom Bustology was, think of it as a generalist's approach to thinking about finance. So I brought in different lenses, microeconomics, macroeconomics, biology, politics, psychology, and said, hey, this is a different way to think about finance. And it seemed to resonate. Some of the world's largest pools of capital started asking for what this implied for their business, their asset allocation, how they were thinking about investing. So it led to whether it was speaking engagements, board positions, consulting opportunities, but a whole slew of opportunities emerged because of that.
Yeah. Well, actually, when I looked at your LinkedIn profile, it positioned you as a global generalist, and digging deeper into that, you've likened yourself to a fox as opposed to a hedgehog. So, first question really is, what is a global generalist, and why is it advantageous to be like a fox?
Well, so again, if you think of the world as getting, and I do think this is happening, the world is getting increasingly siloed, increasingly focused, increasingly narrow. Everyone, even business schools teach this, right? Which is develop your core competence, develop your expertise, differentiate, get narrower, get deeper, become more expert, and that will be your basis of competitive advantage. Well, that implies a world that is more and more siloed by function, by geography, by industry. And my view is the value in that world starts shifting to the connections or looking across silos rather than within silos. And so the reason I describe myself as a global generalist is global because I want to cross the geographic silos, right? I think a global perspective is more important than ever, whether it comes to geopolitics, as we can tell in the world today, or even economics and thinking about, businesses, et cetera. So I think global is really important. And the generalist logic means uh, sort of my self-described way to think about crossing industries within geographies. So within the United States, my consulting work has had me helping defense and aerospace companies, food manufacturing companies, mining companies, construction companies, hospitality companies. I think there is a value in being a generalist when everybody else is a specialist. And so that's
Yeah.
why I call myself a global generalist.
And the fox piece, because I know, well, the first time I heard the fox and the hedgehog was a Jim Collins Good to Great piece where he was talking about, you know, where hedgehogs are very specialists, aren't they? They're deeply passionate. They want the best in the world at that thing that they're doing, and it drives their economic or resource engine. Whereas you're looking at it from a different perspective, because he was talking about foxes being a bit more scattered, diffuse, and consistent, but that was looking from a company perspective.
Well, it's interesting. So it goes back 2,500 years or so,
Yeah.
uh, where there was a Greek poet that referred to it, I think, as the fox knows many things and the hedgehog knows one big thing. It was later written up, Isaiah Berlin and others wrote about the fox versus the hedgehog. And it's come to represent, at least in popular lore, a belief that a hedgehog is someone that is really expert and specialized in one domain. And a fox is someone that knows lots of things about, lots of other things, right? So little things about lots of things. And so the other way to describe it as being an inch deep and a mile wide, i.e. a fox, or a mile deep and an inch wide might be a hedgehog. So I've fallen as a generalist into that fox camp. In the sense of thinking broadly rather than deeply. Now, I would say I've tried to counteract that by being a deep thinker about broad topics, but that's just my way of trying to sort of mix both of those domains. The idea really is someone wants to be specialized or someone wants to be a generalist.
Yeah.
And I actually looked at it, Nick, you might find this interesting. Your listeners might find this interesting. I was like, well, where did this come about? Well, it turns out the defense mechanisms for a hedgehog, if they're feeling threatened in the wild, is to roll up into a ball. That's the only thing they do. They just roll up into a ball. One thing, that's what they're good at, rolling up into a ball. Whereas a fox has many different tools to, if they're feeling threatened, they can run, they can hide, they can climb, they can do other things. So the fox became a multi tool sort of thinker, if you will,
Yeah.
or multiple
Yeah.
way.
You also position yourself as a futurist. I'm curious, how does one become a futurist in the first place?
So it's funny. Lots of people have labeled me lots of different things. Some people labeled me a futurist. Some say economist. I hate all these labels. I've never self-described as a futurist. I don't think of it. I don't think we can know the future. In fact, I've written pieces saying when navigating uncertainty, it's critical to think in terms of futures, plural, because none of us knows which future is going to come through, right? But we can think in terms of scenarios, and that'll help us navigate uncertainty. But thinking in terms of one future and claiming that I could identify it sounds just so arrogant, and it's just bluntly wrong, right? I mean,
Yeah.
we don't know what the future is going to hold. It's probabilistic. So connect dots, figure out what you think the right scenarios to contemplate are, understand what may happen in each of those scenarios, and navigate the uncertainty, making your best judgment with that uncertainty as part of it, rather than thinking it doesn't exist.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, reading one of your books, but reading lots of articles, it's about looking at the multi dimensions or through different lenses, at least connecting those dots, as you say, keeping your ear to the ground, and just pulling in strands of information from different sources, a form of triangulation, if you like, isn't it, to then
Absolutely.
give you that idea of how to move forward with certainty.
Yes, Nick, it's totally about triangulation because I have a very deep philosophical belief that every perspective is limited, every perspective is biased, and every perspective is incomplete, including our own. So each and every one of us has a limited, incomplete, and biased perspective. So why would you not use more than one perspective to help you sort of see the big picture that you literally and structurally cannot see?
Yeah. Yeah. So, well, we're talking about trying to get some certainty, but we definitely live in a time of uncertainty. And what do you see as the most important factors affecting the global economy in the future when you look at it?
Oh, so when I look at the global economy, and I take a big picture step back, and I do some of this in my speaking and consulting and investing work these days, there really are a handful of what I'd call tectonic trends and pressures that are existing today. It would be foolish to not talk about technology, right? I
Yeah.
mean, whether it's the global economy, whether it's geopolitics, whether it's human autonomy, whether it's our expansion off this planet, whether it's our mining below the seabed, and whether it's just how we all interact. Technology is having an accelerating and transformative impact on our lives and how we think about uncertainty. And by the way, I don't think it's always a good development, but we can come back to that.
Yeah.
So artificial intelligence is by far the most prevalent and most popular forms of these technologies today. But I would argue there's also just the traditional technological improvements that are taking place all over the world, whether it's access to energy because of technological developments in the oil patch or within alternative energy, etc. Technology is marching forward, accelerating, and that has big implications for the business world and the economy. I would just state one thing here, since you asked about it in terms of the economy. Like, technology is perhaps the single most powerful deflationary force in the world. And by deflationary, I mean it allows us to produce more supply with the same or fewer inputs. The result is a lot of these pressures we hear about, oh, it's inflation here, inflation there, may be temporary because the technological engine marches forward. And as it does, that's a deflationary force. So that's one force for sure I think we need to think about.
Yeah.
Number two, you should probably think about demographics, right? The world's largest economies are all aging. They're getting older. The United States is getting older. Europe's getting older. Russia's getting older. China's getting older. Japan's getting older. And so that has certain implications, right? Some of the implications may include as people move to fixed incomes, they spend less. Again, all else equal, that is another deflationary force, right? Spending less, assuming the same supply exists out there, means prices would be falling, not rising. So again, deflation. And, I'll just mention a third one because I do think it's impactful. And that has to do with what's happening within the energy patch. And it's related to technology, but not, which is a lot more supply. We're capturing more energy from everything and everywhere. Right? Whether it's alternative energy, now we've got tidal energy, we've got folks doing stuff, of course, with traditional hydrocarbon energy, the modification in the nuclear landscape of small modular nuclear reactors and next generation nuclear. We're seeing a lot more energy. And so energy supply growing also is another factor to think about. But yeah, I think those are some of the big trends that I see in the global economy. And you can see even from how I describe this, these are crossing silos, right? They're crossing silos. Technology is in a silo of its own and impacts economics, geopolitics, etc. Public affairs, that also is impacted, right? We can manage public perception now with some of this, big data analytics and predictive analytics that some of the tech companies are using now. But energy is a different domain that affects all of us in all walks of life around the world. And then demographics, of course, is a different form of analysis.
Yeah. I don't know whether reading your books has taken me down a rabbit hole of reading similar type books, but those on the YouTube channel, you can see another book behind me as well as Vikram's. It's called The End of the World is Just the Beginning. I don't know whether you've read that book, but it talks about similar topics, actually. Definitely, touching on the demographics and the fact that there is no, this not no global boom anymore, and it is aging, and but this power shift of where it's going. And I think as well, I think I was listening to a talk of yours, and I think it was something like you were throwing stats out there, so I made a mention of them. But it was something like in India, we're adding 60 million people every year to the workforce. So you can see how the shift in power can change there. And you took, I think you took an example of Nigeria, was it? That's only the size of Texas, and if you extrapolate what's happening today, forward by say 70 years, that they'll have 1 billion people there. So this African and Indo, not Asian, but India and Africa is really changing things.
Yeah, it is changing things. And by the way, I think our traditional ways of thinking about demographics, like, I think they're wrong. And by the way, Peter's a great thinker. I like Peter. Peter and I have spoken at lots of events. So his book there, while I'm embarrassed to say, and hopefully Peter doesn't hold this against me, I haven't read it. I will read it.
It's a good
So
book.
it is a good book, yeah. But let's go back to demographics. Historically, the way most academics and business consultants have thought about demographics is a large pool of young individuals in a population is a good thing. A small pool of older folks up at the top of the pyramid. So an ideal pyramid would be, very few older people, lots of young people, great productivity boom. They call this a demographic dividend.
Yeah.
I'm not convinced. I think we now, because of technological developments, find us in a world where actually young people may be a liability rather than an asset.
Right.
And here's why. The unskilled, illiterate Indian farm worker no longer can go to a factory and compete against a robot. And so, in the grand scheme of history, the window on traditional industrialization driven development may have closed. China may have been the last large population to take farmers to factories, build a middle class that now spends and creates a self-sustaining, consumer-oriented economy. Now, they're still heavily export-oriented, but they've developed a middle class. India may have missed that window because taking those farmers to the factory, now those factory workers, which are disproportionately robots, they don't complain. They don't make errors. When they do, the engineer fixes them. They don't make the same error. They're happy to work around the clock. They don't have religious holidays. They don't get sick, etc. And they provide productivity with less volatility. And so I would suggest that actually the way we've thought about young individuals entering a labor pool as an asset may be wrong. That in fact, that's a liability. A government now needs to create jobs, where actually technology is helping eliminate jobs. And so the technologically advanced countries, which are what you need to develop a middle class to create those surpluses that can be shared and allow people to improve their lives, may be less likely in places with large populations.
Fascinating. Really fascinating. So when you're looking to make predictions, Vikram, you keep your finger on the pulse. You speak with, we've talked about triangulation, speaking to global leaders in business, government officials, people in academia, journalists, the like. But I did see a fascinating talk of yours discussing how you use different economic indicators, and you use the world's tallest skyscrapers to help predict
Yeah.
recessions, financial crisis around the world, you name it. Can you tell our listeners about how this indicator works?
Yeah. So one of the things I try to do as a generalist is look for where the underlying conditions that might characterize, in this case, a financial bubble, surface before the bubble is obvious, right? So, well, some of the characteristics that almost every bubble would have would be easy money, banks being flush and willing to lend, a speculative juice sort of flowing nicely within the spirit of developers, right? People feeling confident, maybe even overconfident. And then, at some point, the psychology kicks in to the point where people are saying, all right, I want to be, it's about me, me, me. I want to be the tallest, right? And so it turns out that the world's tallest skyscrapers tend to telegraph financial bubbles. At least historically, this has been the case. We'll see if it continues to be the case.
Yeah.
Now, let's just go back and look at a little history. In 1929, the Empire State Building was being worked on it. It wasn't completed. They have to pause it, etc. But it became the world's tallest freestanding structure right at the beginning of the Great Depression. In 1997, right as the Asian financial crisis was about to kick into high gear, Kuala Lumpur took the title, the Petronas Towers. So again, the Petronas Towers, world's tallest skyscraper, built with borrowed capital, built with the intention of attracting tenants and an egotistical, we want to be the center of the world.
Yeah.
In 1999 into 2000, Taipei 101, ground zero of the technology boom. Now, maybe in the hardware sense, because they were foundries and chips there in Taipei, became the world's tallest freestanding structure. And that title moved in 2007, before the global financial crisis, to Dubai. With back then, the Burj Dubai, now Burj Khalifa, became the world's tallest structure. And again, the reasons why this happens are because they illustrate the underlying conditions of overconfidence, a speculative instinct, and easy money. You couldn't build skyscrapers to be the world's tallest if you didn't have those conditions. So I went backwards and said, all right, where do these conditions sort of bubble up before we say we're in a bubble, and pay attention to it? I'll give you another one that I've recently been paying attention to, given the geopolitics of the day. There's something known as the Pentagon Pizza Index.
Right.
And the Pentagon Pizza Index looks at when there's a surge in pizza deliveries to the US Pentagon, which is the home of the US military. Well, it turns out when that happens, it's because people are planning on working late, or there's some dramatic world affair about to be revealed and understood. And so pizza deliveries to the Pentagon surge. Well, it turns out that happened right before Israel attacked Iran recently. It also just happened again before the US revealed that it had attacked Iran. So, okay, maybe there's something to pizza deliveries. But I really enjoy connecting these seemingly irrelevant dots because they illustrate some of the underlying conditions of the insight we're trying to understand.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
It's fun. I mean, because I do enjoy them, right?
Yeah, yeah, and I think there's the page that you refer to. It's for any listeners out there. It's skyscraperpage.com, and if you look on there now, it not only shows the tallest buildings, of which the Burj is still, but it shows what's coming as well, what's being constructed. I think Jeddah Tower in Saudi Arabia is due to be finished in 2028. So, but it's amazing how much construction is going on right now. But in fact, how it
Nick, that's great. It's great that you bring that up because I've often told my consulting clients, I've told investment committees of some of the world's largest sovereign wealth funds, I've told some of the largest pools of capital in the world. They said, well, Vikram, what do I do? And this is even before I describe the indicator. What's the unique insight, Vikram, you can tell me to help me understand asset allocation? And I tell them, watch skyscraperpage.com. And they're like, what? Everyone's always like, come on, I thought you're going to give me some regression, some detailed model. I'm like, no. It captures it all here. I mean, it's complicated why I believe it. But I'm telling you, this is the easy way for you to get a summary of a lot of thinking.
Yeah. We've already touched on it, I suppose, when we talked about technology, but specific to AI, where do you think it'll take the world? What's your view? Is it this big opportunity we should embrace, or should we see it as a bit of a threat too? What's your take on it?
Yeah, I'll answer your question this way. Yes, it's an opportunity and a threat.
Yeah.
Yes, it's both. Is an opportunity? Absolutely. The ability for we as humans to have at our fingertips digested versions of unbelievable amounts of data and be able to query and get answers back relatively efficiently, maybe not perfectly, but efficiently. That's a huge opportunity for us to embrace. That's a huge opportunity for productivity enhancement. That's a huge opportunity for us to get more done. Think of what could happen with drug development. Think of, if we're testing molecules and potential efficacy one by one by one by one, what if we could do in parallel 10,000 possible drugs? We'll be able to advance medicine a lot more quickly. So I think there's an amazing opportunity. Is it a threat? Absolutely, it's a threat. Right? I know individuals that now literally don't think about anything other than what ChatGPT is their answer for. right? I'd
Yeah.
rather we should retain an ability to think for ourselves, right? I mean, this was the worry I had even before these LLMs became popularized. In that book I wrote in 2020 called "Think for Yourself," which was literally we are losing the ability to think for ourselves, and there's lots of reasons for it. We can get into it, but I want to restore some of that. And I think, unfortunately, some of the AI engines are trying to displace our thinking, and our muscle memory of thinking is being lost, if you will. Like we're not thinking as much, and people don't like to think as hard as they used to, and that concerns me actually. So that I would view as a threat.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and I think I thought it was quite insightful. This is not a new thing, but Sam Altman, founder, CEO of OpenAI, ChatGPT, he launched WorldCoin. I think they've since rebranded to World, haven't they? Based on the fact that he thinks AI will, well, he definitely sees it will eliminate jobs. Thus, he talks about redistributing the wealth generated by AI to people through his World coins. So he's definitely got an idea of where the future's heading. And it might be that us maybe us knowledge workers are going to lose our jobs and we need to reskill. But then that happened with the factory workers through automation as well, didn't it? So it's just an evolution of how things and where things are going. But
Yeah,
yeah.
I do think this evolution is interesting, and you're right. We've always had technological developments that have displaced workers. That's not new. We've had that over time, and we're still fine, right? To me, the difference this time is the pace of change. So let's just take something like autonomous driving, right? So the largest industry, excuse me, the industry with the largest number of workers in America, at least historically over the last 3 to 5 years, has been truck driving. So there's 2 point something million truck drivers driving trucks up and down, moving goods around the entire continent effectively. And so this is a big industry. Historically, if there was a technological development that would have disrupted a very populous labor market like this, you would see people wouldn't enter, and over time retirees would dissipate and the pool would shrink slowly. And after 30, 40 years, it would be fine. The adjustment happened. Unfortunately, or fortunately, technology is moving faster than ever before. And the result of autonomous trucking, should we get to that point, when it happens, every trucking company is going to almost adopt it instantaneously for competitive reasons. They're going to have to. So it's not going to be this 20-year transition away from traditional truck driving to autonomous driving. If we get autonomous truck driving, it will happen rapidly. And therefore, it's tending to be more disruptive. It's a pace issue, not necessarily, although maybe a technological displacement issue.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and I think with this onset of AI and ChatGPT, we're drowning in data and information like never before. And you've talked about it already at the beginning about making sense of it. Then we need to lean on specialists, experts, and this over reliance on things like algorithms. It just means we're hearing back in our own echo chamber what our own thoughts are or what we believe in. But that gets us onto your book, Think for Yourself,
Yep.
because I love it. I think reading it we need to be more open-minded. We need to be more generalists as opposed to experts. Can you tell us a bit about what inspired you to write the book in the first instance?
Oh, what a great question. I love it, Nick. I love that you're asking that question rather than a specific question about the book, because there is a story here. So as I told you, my first book was about financial bubbles, and it was about using multiple lenses to navigate financial uncertainty around a bubble. Predominantly focused on asset allocators and the world's largest pools of capital. That was the audience I was speaking to, but it had expanded to individual investors, financial advisors, etc. And so I can give you an explicit moment in time. So I gave a speech to a group of, I think they were registered investment advisors, financial advisors in the United States. And I went home for a minute, and there was one individual, he had talked to me a little bit after. I hadn't thought anything of it. 3 years later, this individual calls me up, tracks me down, and says, Vikram, I wanted to thank you. And actually, he said, Dr. Vikram, I wanted to thank you. And I said, oh, what are we talking about? He said, I heard you speak and you helped me and my wife navigate a cancer diagnosis. And I said, I'm sorry, I think I'm not that kind of doctor. I appreciate you remembering possibly the speech I think I met you at, but with all due respect, that speech was about financial bubbles. And I was telling you how to use multiple lenses and think differently about that. He said, "Oh, I know that's what you think you were talking about, Vikram." He says, "Actually, what you were talking about was navigating uncertainty. It
Right.
happened to be you were talking about finance. But my wife and I came back and we talked ourselves through a cancer diagnosis and we considered multiple lenses, not just quantity of life, but quality of life. The fact that we had a grandkid having a birthday that we wanted to go to rather than to have my wife in treatment. The fact that we were willing to concede there may be less life, but it would be a better life. And we made trade offs using multiple lenses." And he said, "I'm really pleased to tell you that she's been in remission and she's fine now. But we would have had this treatment had we not thought through thinking about this uncertainty with multiple lenses, which you inspired me to do." And I was like, wow, unbelievable. That's the kind of phone call you really do want to get, right? Because you sit there and you're like, okay, this is interesting. So I took 2 years off of writing and to go think. I was a senior fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School for these 2 years, and I started a project that started around the idea that a generalist was better able to navigate uncertainty, that connecting dots was more important than generating dots, that in fact one should keep experts on tap, but not on top, that actually owning decisions and the context was more important than finding some unique technological breakthrough insight, specifically in the domains outside of finance. And so Think for Yourself was the result of that process of taking a couple of years to think about this, studying a couple of different domains where I think uncertainty was natural. Like, should we get this treatment? Not. How do I invest or not? Should we, pursue this strategic course of action in business or not? In the intelligence sphere with, government and geopolitics, is this assessment correct or not? And when I looked through all those domains, there were some common threads, and those
Yeah.
common threads were pulled together in the book that became Think for Yourself.
B2B Frameworks is a curated collection of proven business frameworks to develop your strategic thinking skills, solve your biggest business problems, and unlock your next promotion. Our mission is to help you achieve these goals. We want to create the next generation of successful business leaders by providing the tools and frameworks needed to create effective strategies that drive business growth. Each framework comes with a downloadable set of instructions with large, colourful diagrams and editable templates to guide you through the process step by step and prompt you to consider the problem from every possible angle. Along with audio guides and educational tools, our extensive content library is full of real-world examples and case studies of strategic thinking in action. So why learn with B2B frameworks? We've carefully curated only the most effective, proven business and marketing frameworks. Our downloadable materials and audio guides will help you easily apply each framework. And the insights and advice you'll find across the site are based on 30 years of consulting experience from one of the world's leading business strategy experts, Paul Haig. B2B Frameworks is a small investment to advance your career or grow your business. Start your journey to becoming a successful business leader by joining B2B Frameworks today. Well, I mean, what a fabulous meeting, what a fabulous outcome. And that changed your direction in terms of, where you were going as well, in terms of your writing.
Yeah, really.
Yeah.
Thank you.
The subtitle of the book, I'm not sure on YouTube whether you could see that, but it's called Restoring Common Sense in an Age of Experts and Artificial Intelligence. So what I want to know is, when did we start to lose the plot and outsource our thinking? And what's your favourite examples from the book where others haven't used the common sense?
Yeah, well, let me start with why I think we've gotten so siloed and specialized, because I think that ties in, right? So I actually go back and blame marketing and media for this. So at least in the United States, and I think it's been true globally, historically there were, I grew up with like 3 or 4 channels on TV. Right. So it was fine. 3 or 4 channels. You'd watch the news. You'd see okay. Then they got a little more sophisticated when they got cable TV, and they said, "Well, we want to segment people based on their interests because it'll allow us to have more effective marketing and advertising." So, okay, Nick, you like sports, we're going to have a sports channel. We're going to have, but by the way, somebody else likes cooking. We're going to have a cooking channel. Okay, no, this person likes to renovate homes. We'll have a home improvement channel. There's another, oh, this person's a news junkie. Let's make it 24/7 news, all the time news. And suddenly you're able to segment people by their interests. As a result of that, you then start catering the advertising dollars and you attract advertisers who care about those individuals and their interests. And you keep compounding this. And then with social media, we find ourselves getting into these effectively filter bubbles or echo chambers, like you said, right? So they all start suddenly getting in, and you get fed and you live in this world, and your reality is what you think, and you think what they tell you, and it gets confirmation bias on steroids, right? And so I think that's how we got here, was this segmentation logic driven by marketers, the media, propensity of advertising dollars to turn into revenues. These are the metrics that drove this siloization, segmentation, and therefore more and more of these echo chambers that you are not needing to think for yourself. I'll use a US example. If you're disproportionately conservative in your thinking and you start watching conservative news shows, then you start getting the data you want there. You stop thinking. You don't have to question your own thoughts. You start getting what you think. You start seeing what you think. They tell you what to think. You adopt it. And by the way, this is not just a conservative. This is true on the liberal side too, right? This is true in all walks of life. And so what you get is this conforming tendency. And so we stop thinking for ourselves, right? So that's, I think, a little bit as to how we got here. And social media, I think, takes this and puts it on steroids. And then we have these dynamics of, they call it surveillance capitalism. But the idea that all of this data about each of us is out there and can manipulate us and make us take action, whether or not we actually would have taken that action without that manipulation, we'll never know. We think we're autonomous, but at the end of the day, maybe we've been put in a direction and manipulated is sort of the negative way. In other ways, you say, well, you wanted it. They just help make it easy for you. It's great. So we can debate that. But I think that's how we got to this point where we're not thinking for ourselves as much as we used to, because we find ourselves in more of these echo chambers and getting a lot of confirmatory data and evidence in front of us. So now, it doesn't mean we shouldn't follow algorithms. And so one of my favorite stories from the book, since you asked that, was my wife and I sitting on the couch trying to pick a movie for the evening, right? We're sitting on the couch. And so you jump up to Netflix. And of course, my wife she gets there a couple minutes earlier and she does a couple previews. But then I get there. But now I have an information asymmetry. She has more information. I'm not going to let her choose until I see the previews. And I might add a couple previews of myself. And so I want to do that. And then we have this debate and you go back and forth. And at some point, we have the visible manifestation of FOMO. We're now convinced, because Netflix will offer me 1 million videos available on demand right there, that there better be, in fact, there is. We know there is the perfect movie for our mood, for the temperature, for our style, for after we ate a certain food, what we had seen before. There's a perfect movie, right? There's one that hits the spot perfectly. But of course, we're not going to find that. And so rather than satisficing and just taking the algorithm's recommendation and moving on, we're left there feeling unfulfilled, even though we probably watched a really good movie.
Yeah.
We thought there was a better one. So that's sort of an example of, a lot of people ask me, Vikram, it's hard to think for myself. Do I have to think for myself everywhere? And the answer is no. When the stakes are low, some of these algorithms are really going to be probably helpful, right? Like, maybe you've liked watching Top Gun and Top Gun Maverick, and it's going to suggest something else to you that you'll probably like. Like, okay, that's good. Don't waste your time thinking for yourself. It did some good thinking. It did some searching for it. That's great, right? So I think sometimes we can take my logic around connecting dots and thinking for yourself too far. When the stakes are low, don't stress about it. Now, with that said, if you have a major medical challenge in front of you, that could be life threatening, I would suggest actually connecting some dots and looking across silos may be productive. That actually thinking for yourself, not dismissing experts. This is something that I really want to be clear on. I do not believe it makes sense to dismiss experts. Experts are useful. Experts are critical. Experts are extremely valuable. You know, God forbid someone has a brain tumor, go see a brain surgeon. Don't go see a cardiologist. It's like there's reasons for these experts. They play a critical role. But at the same time, the context in which these decisions are taking place is something only you as the decision maker can appreciate and understand. And so, if we have time, Nick, I got another example I can jump into real
Sure.
quick.
No, definitely.
So this is one that causes a lot of cardiologists anxiety. And since we were talking about medical issues, this is a, a fact pattern that is highly believable, and some of your listeners may actually have experienced. And I'm not saying I know what the best medical advice is. I'm just saying this is a fact pattern that is believable based on the siloed world we have. An individual goes to a doctor, is diagnosed with having high cholesterol. The cardiologist suggests at that point, your heart health is really important. We need to put you on a statin to lower your cholesterol. Now, here are some facts. All else equal, lower cholesterol lowers your risk of heart attacks. All else equal, a statin will lower your cholesterol. And here's the third fact, which nobody likes hearing. If you lower your cholesterol through a statin, you often do not change your risk of heart attack. And you're gonna scratch your head. And you're like, wait, what? Hold on a sec. Lower cholesterol equals lower risk of heart attack. Statin equals lower cholesterol. Therefore, statin equals lower risk of heart attack. That's not true. The last point is not true, at least based on the data I've seen. And again, I don't want to debate medical professionals that might know more. And it's because of this. And this tells you the silo problem that I'm getting at. It turns out when you lower your cholesterol through the use of a statin, you often get interference with your insulin production system, and you are now at an elevated risk of diabetes. So you might be trading heart disease for diabetes. Now, unfortunately, diabetes comes with an elevated risk of heart attacks. And so you may, in fact, find that the cardiologist gets to claim success, victory. Look, your cholesterol's down. They start screaming and fabulous. And then you go down the hall of your medical practice and you see the endocrinologist who says, I'm sorry, sir, you've got an elevated risk of diabetes here. And so, again, thinking about navigating uncertainty by crossing silos. And again, everyone's personal medical history, family medical history. I don't want to suggest that statins are good or bad. I'm just suggesting that fact pattern is possible, and I demonstrated and documented lots of cases of it in my research.
Yeah,
So,
well,
crossing silos is critical, and thinking for yourself and the context and your individual propensities, etc., really important.
I've been nodding vigorously at this end, but both from the Netflix example, because that happened just last night with me and my wife trying to find the movie, but also with that medical example, because I've been suffering with a bad back, and I can rest it, and it will get better probably over time. But I'm trying to fast track it so that I'm back on my feet quicker and playing sports. And so I've been to see a chiropractor, I've been to see an osteopath, I've been to see a physio, and each one's saying, "Oh yeah, you don't want to listen to them, you want to listen to me." And everyone's an expert in their own field, and I'm caught in the middle trying to make sense of it all. So I definitely get that. I think the cover of the book actually, and just playing on that common sense theme, it shows a car blindly following sat nav off a harbour wall into the sea. And I live in the country, and near my house is up the road. There's a big sign that says, "Do not follow sat nav, turn back now." But in the last 6 months, I've seen 2 cars bottomed out on this road. It's because it's definitely not passable. They just blindly follow that sat nav. I think you call it blind obedience, don't you? Which I loved. But
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, the listeners here, I think, will appreciate this. Oftentimes, we will immediately get into a car and put in the the nav system. It'll tell you where to go and how to go and what is the quickest route for the current time that you pushed in the directions, right? So here's an example, and I'll just ask you, Nick. We'll do a real-time case study here. So let's just say it's a public holiday and you are interested in going someplace, and the closest and quickest route goes by a school, and it's the morning drop-off time at school. So the nav system is telling you there's a lot of traffic here, but it's a public holiday. So it's rerouting you a little other way. Do you listen to the rerouting, or do you go through the traffic that may or may not be there based on an algorithm, but it's a public holiday, schools are closed? Which way would you go?
Yeah. Yeah. No, we all
It's
do
just,
it. We
right?
all do it.
Oh my God. Well, it's just 10 minutes of my life. I'll go around it. I could have saved 10 minutes by ignoring it, but maybe it is there, and then I'll feel frustrated. And okay, so I won't do it.
Yeah. Yeah. We probably aren't aware of it, but our decisions are being influenced all the time by others. And you talk about framing in the book. What impact does it have on individual decision making, and what can we do to recognize and counteract these influences?
Yeah, this is hard. This is really hard. Framing changes how we think about problems and how we think generally across domains, right? I mean, if I frame your decision matrix as this little box, you will likely optimize within this box. But how many of us truly break the framing and ask the question, or provide an answer to what we... So if I ask you, Nick, what's your favorite fruit, apple or an orange? You're unlikely to tell me. You're unlikely to say, I'd like pears. Or how about a lychee? Or do you have something else? Right? Because it's been framed as, here's your option set. In all walks of life, right? You go to a restaurant and you get a menu, right? Okay. There's burger, there's chicken fingers, there's other things, fish and chips. You got all this. Okay. Well, what if I want to have a salmon piece? Well, okay. They may have it, you may want it, but it's been framed for you as a set that you can choose from. Now, there may be efficiency reasons in a restaurant case, but in a strategic decision-making sense, if you're a business leader and a business thinker, how things get framed to you often really determine how you think about them. So I always ask the question, which is, if you want to break the frames around you, literally try to blank sheet it. Don't take advice, or seek advice from different and disparate domains. Again, going back to that underlying philosophy I have, which is every perspective is limited, biased, and incomplete. Let's not rely on one or two. So, one of the greatest creative artists of all time was Twila Thorpe, who did a bunch of dance choreography stuff. I've actually gone through choreography and even studied conductors of symphonies to understand, how do you bring things together in different ways? Because I do think how it's framed is often how it's determined, and framing is usually done by experts in silos. So looking across silos is one way to break the framing. Thinking broadly when others think narrowly is another way, but also going to areas that are totally off the reservation, different, might spur thinking in ways you haven't thought about. So I often talk about reading fiction and watching movies as being insightful ways to improve your creativity, because they do get you to think out of the box, the proverbial box. So yeah, that's that's a small way to do it.
Yeah. As I was reading your book, my mum, she's 80 years old, and she's had one knee replacement already, but she needs another one, and she suffers from lymphedema, which causes complications. So just last week, she visited the surgeon, and he said he relayed it back to her. He said there was a 10% chance that there would be complications, and it may not work. So she's decided to have an injection to alleviate the pain. But if he'd framed it differently and said, he was 90% confident it would work,
Yes.
I'm sure she would have thought differently about the whole operation. So, just on an everyday occurrence, it's happening all over.
Yep, that's right. Yeah, it's a 90% confidence that it's going to work properly, 90% probability. And the 10%, 8 of those 10% will not be material. You'll have some complications and we'll solve them. I mean, it won't be a big deal. And so it's a 98% chance of again, I'm not sure that's true, but if it were framed that way, totally different decision.
Yeah, I think so. As we look to the future, Vikram, each year you make some bold predictions, and this year you were looking forward to 2030. So I'd just like to touch on a couple of predictions that you made. So Meta, they used to be a client of mine a few years ago, and there was a lot of talk back in the day about the metaverse. And you mentioned that because of persistent work from home pressures and loss of productivity, the work from home practices will evolve, and there'll be the rapid adoption of augmented and VR headsets that we'll use from home to work on productivity, as well as being easier to monitor employee engagement. Is this something, or is the metaverse going to take off in the next 5 years, do you think, or is it going to be an evolution of that?
Yeah. So let me start with one comment on the prediction logic first, right? So
Okay.
let's go there, if you don't mind, because listeners that may not know me or may not have followed my work wouldn't understand. So I explicitly seek to write out predictions for a 5-year forward view, and I've done this in a gimmicky way for dozens of years, but publicly for the last 10. Where I've done in 2015, you can find my 15 predictions for the next 5 years. And I always use 5 years forward for a reason. I find it very hard to predict anything on a 1-year view. It's too random. And I think 10 years, technology and other things can dissipate and make things even harder to understand. But 3 to 5 years feels about right, where you can connect some dots, see some trends, and get some insight. And so that's the reason I do the time horizon. The other thing I would say is I've never had accuracy as the goal. For me, it's always about usefulness. And there's a distinction here, right? Usefulness is I can get you to think differently, broaden your framing, get you to possibly consider alternatives to a world that you see. Whether or not it happens, it's going to make you a better thinker, better able to navigate uncertainty, and therefore it will have been useful even if the prediction doesn't come out to be true, right?
Yeah.
So that's that's the caveat, the disclaimer at the bottom of the predictions piece. With that said, the metaverse or augmented reality, I do think it's coming. It's going to get increasingly popularized and possibly even productive. I say this sort of in air quotes, productive, because I think we're going to find ourselves interacting with individuals in more and more virtual ways, right? And people may adopt identities in a virtual world that may be different than their real world identities. But even think about this: you and I are having a virtual conversation recorded, but if it was a 3D augmented reality, we would feel better about this. We would be more engaged. I think we would actually feel more connected and feel like we actually had a real conversation that would sustain and have multiple more. It would feel like we had a deeper relationship. And that is true within companies. And so I think in this world that's getting increasingly oriented towards transactions, that the relationship building technologies have a nice tailwind that should supplement this transaction driven logic that's prevalent, right? Everywhere you look, it's transactions. You do this, that happens, this, that. Work from home is another thing. I don't really care if you're a human being, if you're here in the office or not, whatever, just get it done, give it to me, check the box, I can move it. It goes into, it's almost dehumanizing at some level, right? And so the rehumanizing, the relationship oriented stuff where creativity matters, where the combination of different perspectives coming together could lead to sparks. That's pretty exciting. And I think that is where things like augmented reality, virtual reality, where individuals get to interact, especially where they get to be themselves, could be pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Now, it also might lead to more creativity as people develop new identities. Hey, you know what? I have to be the proper academic background, PhD, CEO. That's Vikram's identity here. But maybe there's a world where I can enter and I can just be like, hey, listen, why don't we develop that? That's so cool, right? Oh, but that's socially inappropriate. But I think it'd be interesting. Maybe it leads to something interesting. You don't know. You could be, if you don't have to be yourself, maybe you can be more creative in other ways. So I don't know what'll come of it, but I do think metaverse, alternative identities, online virtualization, augmented reality, all of these things are coming together. Work from home is spurring it.
Yeah, yeah. My final question today, you mentioned that more and more commercial activities will be put into space amidst increasing belief that humans will be an interplanetary species. So things like communication centers, data centers, cell towers moved into space to orbit the Earth. Is this the first step to Elon's SpaceX vision for making humanity a multi-planetary species, or will
Yeah,
we ever get that way?
well, what I'll tell you is this, and I'll frame it, and I'll be quick here. I won't take too much time. Look, historically, humans fill the space we're given, right? We compete to the point where we then suddenly it becomes almost zero sum game in the sense of resources and what have you. And so, what has been one of the most innovative catalysts for progress throughout human history is when we find frontiers, the undeveloped, the unexplored, etc. And that leads to all sorts of really powerful innovations and developments and human expansion of capabilities, new resources, and great flourishing. Well, it turns out if you look today, we're pretty good on planet Earth, right? The next wave of flourishing could be in space and beyond, right? And when space, I mean, yes, let's start communications, obviously going up there. We don't need to be running cables and wires, et cetera, to, through the jungles of Africa to provide cell phone coverage. There's going to be a satellite overhead that'll beam down and give them cell. But then at some point, as you get more and more processing of information in space, why are we sending all this information down to Earth to process here and develop insights? Shouldn't we put data centers in space to do the processing there and send only insights down to us? Why are we using the limited bandwidth to send really heavy bandwidth using, skills or applications? Then if we are going to go get resources, yes, it might be inappropriate, or the economics may not work for asteroid mining today. To go get an asteroid and bring it down, that seems crazy. But what if we use the resources in space to help develop our infrastructure in space, right? So there's some really interesting opportunities, I think, emerging in space. With full disclosure, I am on the board of a for-profit startup space company called Phantom Space, started by two SpaceX co-founders and some others. I'm going to be launching rockets, developing satellite infrastructure, etc. So I'm biased, but I do think it's a very compelling opportunity. The developments in space, the frontier logic. I mean, this is going to be a multi-trillion-dollar economy in space in the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm sure it won't be my lifetime that we need to expand beyond Earth just for survival, but I'm not sure I want that future neither. I'm definitely more looking after what we have in terms of planet Earth rather than looking for the plan B. But I definitely see, the future going up there. So just finish on my usual questions, Vikram. And Tom Fishburne, CEO of Marketunist, his cartoon is read by over 500,000 business readers every week. But he asked you, when you're evaluating future trends and whether to invest or not, how do you decide which is just a fad versus a trend that should be followed?
Oh, it's a perfect question because I'll tell you what I'm doing right now. Actually, this is a nice opportunity for me to tell you my current project right now, which has got 100% of my attention. Beginning last fall, I started trying to connect the dots between a couple of trends and determine which were trends, which were fads. And I couldn't quite tell this inflation deflation thing, but I wanted something to understand, something that would prosper in times of inflation. So if there's inflation, what do consumers do? If there's economic uncertainty, what would consumers do? Is there something a business that could prosper in both those times of inflation as well as recession or deflation? And it turns out frozen pizza does, right? So I'm giving you the punchline now, then we'll go back to some other trends. But I am currently the founder, chairman, and CEO of Goodwell Foods, which is a private label frozen pizza manufacturing business that I started in New Hampshire late last year. So again, people buy frozen pizzas in times of inflation because their budgets are getting pinched. And then In a recession where they have no confidence, they don't go out to eat, but they still want to feel like they're enjoying. So they might buy frozen pizzas and have it at home. And so frozen pizzas, and in particular, private label frozen pizzas, do really well, regardless of which economic. So I think that's a trend, private label growth and, consumer staples. But secondly, it turns out that there has been this, and I don't think it's a fad, there is this trend really around increasing attention to health. And that has led to the explosion in these obesity drugs or obesity treatments, such as Ozempic. And that has led to smaller portion sizes. I believe this isn't a fad. I think we are going to see smaller portion sizes across all walks of life. So the frozen pizza factory that I own and run here specializes in small format frozen pizzas because portion sizes matter. I've also noticed a trend, I don't believe it to be a fad, that chemicals in our food are increasingly being eliminated. We're removing artificial ingredients and chemical preservatives. And so in America, that's happened because of, it's been accelerated perhaps because of Robert Kennedy and the Make America Healthy Again movement. But politics aside, I think this is a trend that we are seeing across the world. People want to know that their food is all natural. They don't want chemical preservatives. They prefer not to have artificial ingredients, and they're willing to see that, to seek that. And so I have a private label frozen pizza manufacturing company that specializes in small format and uses no artificial ingredients or chemical preservatives. And the last part is geopolitics. I think the world is fracturing. And so in this situation, I have a 99.9% US supply chain. So I do think local businesses are becoming more resilient, especially in some of these domains, such as food, than food that has to be imported across borders, et cetera. So as countries focus more on self-reliance. So there you go. That's an example, real time, of I thought through fads. I thought through, well, is this going to turn on me? Are suddenly people going to go back to large portion sizes? Are people be comfortable with chemicals in their food? And I said, no, these are trends. And I'm going to invest around that. So there's an example.
Well, I don't think you can fail there, actually, Vikram, because everyone loves pizza,
Yeah.
and and a healthy pizza. And actually, I speaking from the UK, but when I visited the States, I think we miss a trick over here because just grabbing a slice of pizza, that's sometimes all you need. Whereas you just don't get that here in the UK. You need to get a whole pizza, and so I think smaller
Smaller
portions
portion.
definitely. I get that. I get that as well. Next, just a couple of questions from the listeners. Firstly, Dave Collins, he's in Dallas. He asks, do you think education systems need to adapt to prepare students for future challenges in this world we live?
I do. As you know, Nick, I've spent time teaching at Harvard and at Yale. My wife started a Montessori school. I've taught there. I constantly take educational invitations to speak to students anywhere and everywhere. I think we need to reinstitute a focus on critical thinking. We've gotten so focused on developing skills, so focused on filling kids' heads with knowledge that actually it's the connection, it's the connective tissue across domains of knowledge. So it sounds trite, but it's really important that we get individuals who can think for themselves. We need critical thinking skills, people that ask questions. Forget about the answers. ChatGPT will give you the answers. I want people who can ask good questions. So questions become important, framing becomes important, but more important, connecting dots, thinking for yourself, thinking critically, asking about the assumptions, and imagining alternatives. Those are things we should be teaching. I think they're critical.
Yeah. And secondly, Emma Wilson from California asks, how should leaders be mindful in framing of their communication to avoid unintentional biases?
Oh, well, again, I think it's your sources of information that you got to triangulate. You got to have multiple perspectives at work, right? We use the example of media, but this is a common example that can apply to business leaders as well as every individual out there. Diversify your media diet. That's something I tell everyone. It'll help de-escalate the polarization we feel today. But again, sticking with news, if you listen devoutly and watch devoutly something like Fox News, which is on the conservative side, do me a favor, turn on CNN or MSNBC. I'm not asking you to believe it. I'm asking you to incorporate that perspective into your thinking. You will be better off because of it. You will think more critically, and you will likely think for yourself by triangulating from these different perspectives. Likewise, if you were a devout liberal who listens only to NPR or some of the more historically liberal leaning news sources, again, I'm giving a US perspective, so apologies. But if you are, please turn on a Newsmax. Again, you may not believe it, but incorporating that perspective. So I would say that's true in business, right? If you're getting a financial perspective, great. Go find out a strategic perspective. Ask your marketing group a perspective. Combine perspectives, diversify your information sources, and that will likely break some of the framing biases that exist when you let an expert give you a choice.
Great advice. Great advice. Well, what one piece of business advice would you say is the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
Oh, so I would, it's a simple sentence. The only thing that's certain is uncertainty, right? So that's something I've been told many times. And with that, there's a whole bunch of caveats. I've been told many times. There was an individual, I won't mention him here because he may not want to be mentioned, but a famed money manager who got very active as an activist investor and would be involved with creditor committees and sort of these battles. And he said negotiation sometimes is about the power you have and the power they have. But he also then said one thing that I still to this day remember. Cornered cats jump in strange ways. Cornered cats jump in strange ways. He said, so even if you think you've got all the cards in your hand and you're doing a business negotiation, if you corner someone and you don't let them have a reasonable path for themselves, you're going to turn around, you're going to hurt yourself because they'll do something that's quote unquote irrational. And he used an example from, and I don't remember the specifics, Nick, so apologies, but Johnson & Johnson was buying a company. And the CEO of Johnson & Johnson sent his M&A team up to do the acquisition, and they did such a great job. And they squeezed the acquisition pricing down to the lowest possible. They got the old CEO of the acquired company. They cut his salary. They squeezed his pension. They did everything, and it would have been a great success. And this M&A individual comes back, and he reports the great success to, I believe it was the CEO of Johnson & Johnson, who then says, what did you just do? That's horrible. Go up there, double his salary, give him better pension benefits. We need to work with him. This is not about a win in the short run. Think longer term. We actually need to treat people respectfully, carefully. Think of them as a partner because you just acquired them. It's not about winning. It's about actually growing. And so sometimes those things are different. It comes from that cornered cat logic, etc. But yeah, those are a couple pieces of advice that I would just drizzle out there as things that have been helpful to me.
Helpful to everyone, I think. Who would you like me to reach out to? Who would you like to hear on the podcast in the future?
Oh my goodness, there's so many people I think are fabulous. So I'm going to give you one that is from, I think, a disparate domain from yours, that the idea of being helpful, right? The idea of being helpful outside of, by crossing silos and looking widely. There's an individual who I think is brilliant when thinking about investing and big macroeconomics. His name is Grant Williams, runs a newsletter service. I think he splits his time between the Carolinas and the Cayman Islands, but he's a brilliant thinker. Be useful to hear how he thinks about some of the questions you ask. He's a friend, so if you need help with an invite, I'll get it to him.
Well, I'll definitely lean on there. And he does sound very different to other guests that we've had on, and we're looking for that diversity. So that's excellent, Vikram.
Yeah, he's more economics and more finished, but he's thoughtful, very, very thoughtful.
Yeah. Well, finally, my next guest is Philip Kotler, the one and only Philip Kotler, dubbed the most influential marketer of all time. What question would you like to pose to Philip? And I'll ask him when I speak to him next.
Yeah, so I know he thinks about marketing in different ways. I think there's a responsive, an adaptive, and even a needs generating one. But I'd be really curious that if individuals did start thinking for themselves, how would you market to individuals differently? right? So it turns out a lot of individuals don't think for themselves. So they're subject to these propensity scoring and these things. But what if they started asking questions? What if you actually had independent thinkers as consumers? How would you market to them? How do you identify independent thinkers?
Love it. And the perfect question coming from yourself as well. So
Yeah.
I'll ask that next week when I speak to him. So, well, thank you for a truly enlightening conversation. We've covered so much. I think we all look at the world and the change that's happening right now, and we'd be right to feel maybe a little bit worried about how vulnerable we are. And indeed, we might be right with that. But also, I think you've opened our eyes to looking at the world differently. If we look beyond the short term and look more long term and zoom out to look at the big picture, hopefully there are opportunities, possibilities for growth that we've never had before. So I think we need to embrace this. And you talk a lot about navigating uncertainty. I think your advice to act, adjust, and rather than analyze and be paralyzed with it is the best advice as well. So to all the listeners, connect those dots, be more fox-like, analyze those trends, and then you can make the best decision you can hope to make. So, if people want to get in touch or learn more, is there a specific place where it's best to go, Vikram?
Yeah, listen, obviously, I'm on Twitter. It's just my last name, or I should say on X, excuse me, at Mansharamani, Mansharamani. Also on LinkedIn. And then there is a website, mansharamani.com. And if by chance they want pizza, it's gwfnh.com, goodwellfoodsnewhampshire.com, gwfnh.
Super. Well, I'm sure you'll get visits to all those sites after today. So,
Perfect.
thank you again for your time, Vikram. It's been a great conversation, and good luck with the new venture, Goodwell Foods.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much, Nick. I enjoyed it.
This podcast has been brought to you in partnership with Awards International. Awards International is dedicated to running successful business awards programs and conferences. Founded in 2008 by Don Hales and Neil Skihel, the company's core mission centers on honoring and celebrating exceptional achievements in customer and employee experience, but also in overall business excellence across diverse sectors. In addition, their aim is to showcase best practices, innovations, and achievements that contribute positively to these areas, ultimately inspiring other organizations to improve their own customer experience, employee engagement strategies, and overall business success. To find out more about Awards International and how to register your interest in their awards programs, check their website www.awardsinternational.com.